Hello, everyone, and welcome to this seminar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Janet Anderson. I'm the Commissioner of the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. And this webinar is one of the series that we're offering to providers and indeed some to consumers to explore the different measures which have been legislated by the government over recent months and weeks. Let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting around Australia and paying my respects to elders past and present, and indeed extending that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be joining us for today's webinar. Today, we're going to be focusing on the new provider obligations that have recently been introduced through an Act of Parliament in relation to governance arrangements. Now, these obligations can be variously summarised, but they fall under 6 headings, essentially. Changes to the reporting requirements for material changes and changes to key personnel, assessment of suitability of key personnel, reporting annually on provider obligations, requirements for the composition and the skill set of the members of governing bodies, establishing and continuing a quality care advisory body, and finally offering consumers and their representatives the opportunity to establish one or more consumer advisory bodies at least every 12 months. Now, I'm joined today by 3 people who are going to assist us to traverse this detail. Emma Jobson, an Executive Director in the Commission, and Wunsch, another Executive Director, and Lisa Peterson, who is an Assistant Commissioner in the Commission. At the end of the webinar, you'll see a slide with a link to our website, which will give you access to a lot of our published resources. There'll also be flashing up on the screen a link to a short survey, and we would be very pleased if you would stay online long enough to complete that survey to give us some feedback on how you found today's webinar so that we can continuously improve. Before we get underway, though, I do also want to thank you for joining today and possibly for joining the other webinars which preceded this. Thank you for your commitment to learning as much as you can about these new reforms and getting ready for go live on the 1st of December. I hope you've had an opportunity of glancing at what we call the subordinate legislation relating to these particular reforms, which was released at the end of October, the 31st of October. But even if you haven't, hopefully there's enough content in this webinar to guide you into some of that detail so that you are more familiar with it. We have received some questions prior to the webinar, and I ask if you can use the appropriate buttons to send any questions you have through. As we proceed through the content today, we will deal with as many of those questions as we can at the end of the panellists' presentations, but any we don't get to will be the subject of a Q&A that we will publish on our website. Just before I throw to the first panel member, I actually want to undertake a short poll of you. And it's our way of assessing whether we've made a difference over the course of the hour we spend with you. This poll is seeking to assess your current knowledge and understanding of the strengthening provider governance reforms. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is respond to these quick questions that's going to appear on your screen. And we'd like you to tell us how well you understand these reforms at the moment. Now, the poll is anonymous, so I really hope you'll be candid in your responses. You have 4 options to choose from: very well, well, to some extent, or very little. So just pop your answer in one of those 4 boxes, as it were, and I'll see this coming through to just take it sounding at the outset of the webinar as to the way you would self-assess your own knowledge and understanding of these particular reforms relating to governance obligations. So I'll wait for that to come through. I think it might just be loading now. And the answers are, we have just over 10% of you who rate yourself as knowing relatively little, very little. The vast majority of you rate yourself as having some knowledge, 60%. Another quarter, 25%, consider that you know a fair bit about this. You've rated yourself as well. And we also have 2.5% who rate yourself as knowing a lot about this very well. So thank you very much. We've got a baseline on which to build. Without further ado, let me invite Emma Jobson to kick us off with an overview of the new governance reform requirements. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you, Janet. So firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We certainly understand you need to know more about these reforms, and we appreciate your continued effort in engaging with us on them. So to start, I'd like to run through the scope of the reform. So first of all, who is included? So these reforms relating to provider governance will apply to providers of residential care, home care packages, short-term restorative care in both the home and residential settings, multi-purpose services and transition care programs and services. So all providers will be required to do the following: ensure their governing body has a majority of independent non-executive members and at least one member with experience in the provision of clinical care. To establish and continue a quality care advisory body. To offer consumers and their representatives the opportunity to establish one or more consumer advisory bodies. To assess the suitability of their key personnel at least once a year. To meet reporting requirements for material changes and changes to key personnel, and to ensure their staff have the appropriate skills and expertise to undertake their roles and that they are provided with the relevant development opportunities. And lastly, provide information on their operations annually to the Department of Health and Aged Care. So what are the timeframes for implementation? All providers will be required to meet these obligations. However, importantly, the timeframes will differ depending on the date that you became an approved provider. So existing providers, if you are an existing provider, you will have until 1 December 2023 or next year to meet the requirements for governing and advisory bodies. But there are other obligations you will have to meet much earlier than that. So commencing from 1 December 22 this year, you'll be required to submit material changes, including key personnel notification, within 14 days, to assess the suitability of key personnel at least every 12 months and report annually on your operations. So existing providers in just over 12 months' time from 1 December 23 must also ensure their governing body is mostly made up of independent non-executive members that have the mix of skills and experience to deliver safe and high quality care, and that at least one member has experience in providing clinical care. They need to be able to set up and continue a quality care advisory body and offer to set up at least one consumer advisory body. So new providers from 1 December 22, the timeframes are different for new providers. So if you apply to become an approved provider on or after 1 December 2022, you will need to meet all the requirements from the date of your approval. So transitional arrangements for open applications for provider approval. So organisations that have submitted an application for approved provider status before 1 December 2022 this year, and where a decision on that application is still pending, the new governing and advisory body responsibilities will not apply until 1 December 2023. So to support providers through these transitions, the Commission will soon publish guidance for providers which clearly describes their roles and responsibilities in relation to the new requirements and the role of the Commission in regulating these. The Commission is also already supporting providers to operate with best practice governance through the Governing for Reform in Aged Care program, which Lisa will talk about shortly. So moving on, governing body composition. Under the new regulations in relation to the membership of governing bodies. So as part of our previous reform webinars, we've received several questions relating to the composition of governing bodies, including what is meant by the term independent non-executive member and the requirement for a member to have expertise in clinical care. So we thought it might be useful to provide some additional information on this topic. So an independent non-executive member is a person who does not not hold another position in the organisation, that is not otherwise a member of the executive team, is not able to be readily influenced by their connection to the organisation, does not have a conflict of interest, and ultimately is able to act objectively and independently in the best interest of consumers. So when providers are considering whether someone is able to meet this requirement, in addition to ensuring independence, providers can also ask questions like, does this person understand our service? Can they contribute to the governance of the service? Will they objectively challenge our service? Will they prioritise the best interests of our consumers? So the clinical care requirement for meeting governing body composition. The Commission understands that there is some uncertainty in relation to the requirement that one member of the governing body must have experience in the provision of clinical care. To satisfy this requirement, providers will need to consider the particular clinical experience and qualifications that will best support the decision-making of their governing body in the context of the types of care and services they provide. So as a first step, when considering whether a governing body member meets the requirements to have experience in the provision of clinical care, providers should consider, will this person be able to provide relevant and recent clinical expertise to the governing body? Can this person contribute to the key decisions of the governing body? And does this person understand the provision of care in the contemporary aged care environment? The Commission is keen to continue to work with providers to further clarify what clinical experience for a governing body member means in practice and how this role can best support the governing body in its decision making, and we'll be progressing this work soon. So when do the governing body composition responsibilities do not apply? There are some circumstances where the requirements in relation to membership of the governing body do not apply. These circumstances relate to particular characteristics of the provider, specifically approved providers who have a governing body with fewer than 5 members and who provide aged care to less than 40 care recipients are not required to meet the governing body composition requirements. This is also the case for approved providers who are a state or territory body, state or territory authority, a local government authority, or an Aboriginal community controlled organisation. They do not have to meet the composition requirement for governing bodies. So the Commission understands that there will be circumstances where providers who are not automatically exempt for one of the reasons I've just outlined, but may have difficulty meeting one or both of the responsibilities relating to their governing body. So in these circumstances, providers will be able to seek a determination from the Commission that exempts them from one or both of these requirements for a period of time set by the Commission. And details about this process are being developed and will be provided on the Commission's website. So further details on these reforms have been published, as Janet mentioned earlier, in the subordinate legislation by the Department of Health and Aged Care, and that is available on their website, the Aged Care Engagement Hub. So we encourage you to have a look. Our guidance document detailing the regulatory requirements of the reforms will shortly be available to download from our website. So watch our socials for those updates. We'll also be publishing resources to assist you in implementing the reforms. This includes an ALIS module, so our Aged Care Learning Information Solution platform. And if you haven't already, providers can register to access this on our website under Education. We'll also be publishing resources specifically for consumers of aged care. The most straightforward way for you to keep up to date on the guidance and the resources available is to regularly refer to our website, where you'll find updates and links to the relevant information to support you in continuing to prepare for these changes. Thank you, Janet.
Thanks, Emma. Well done. Some of you might have a question in the back of your minds. Why are we going to all this trouble? And the straightforward answer is the Royal Commission did call out the need for strengthened governance and accountability across the sector. It also pointed to the important opportunities available to lift leadership skills and capacity and to support the sector in delivering a better outcome, a better experience of care by virtue of this improved governance arrangements. So the question then turned on, do we have the right membership of governing bodies? Are providers paying enough attention to the suitability of personnel? Do consumers have an adequate voice in important decisions which are made by aged care providers? All of these questions go to the provisions that we're now outlining for you. So what I want to do now is invite Anne Wunsch, who is another Executive Director of the Commission, to talk about the way in which the Commission will regulate these new requirements. And she's also going to outline briefly the way in which we will assess compliance with the new requirements. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Janet. Hi, everyone. So among my responsibilities in the Commission, I lead our work on assessing applications for approval to provide aged care and assessing and processing notifications of material changes. So I'd like to talk briefly about how my group will manage these functions from 1 December 2022 and how we will engage with approved providers. Now, as highlighted already, there will be new notification responsibilities in relation to material changes and key personnel, including requirements for key personnel to be suitable individuals. So for material changes, within 14 days, a person who is key personnel must tell the approved provider when they experience a change in circumstances that relates to their suitability. Your key personnel must know what the suitability requirements for an individual are, and this will ensure that they can actively consider these requirements when personal circumstances arise that may impact on their suitability. So let's consider a fairly obvious example to illustrate what this means. If one of your key personnel who is responsible for financial management or claiming subsidies then files for personal bankruptcy, then they must tell you, the approved provider, they must tell you, the approved provider, that this has occurred and when the bankruptcy comes into effect. You as approved provider must record this information and consider whether this makes the key personnel unsuitable for the role they perform. I mean, another example could be that one of your key personnel has been banned as a director by the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. This must also be reported, and the approved provider must consider how this banning impacts on the role performed by that individual. In all circumstances, you must record a suitability decision because you'll need to tell us about what you considered and what action was taken. I mean, also within 14 days, approved providers must advise us at the Commission when they employ a new key personnel or one of their key personnel leaves or is no longer a key personnel for the approved provider, or a key personnel is no longer suitable to hold a key personnel position. Now, we're developing guidelines and a new notification form to assist you and your key personnel to understand what you need to tell us and the information needed for us to assess whether there is further information or a need for further engagement. The new form will seek additional information from you and your key personnel, including whether a key personnel change is related to a code of conduct matter or if it's related to the person no longer being suitable and the reason they are no longer suitable. Now, when we receive a notification, we may make inquiries of you about what steps are being taken to actively monitor key personnel suitability. We'll take risk-based, proportionate approach, engaging with you, and where necessary, taking regulatory action. There will be occasions where no further action is required by us, and there may be occasions where we might make a determination that a key personnel is not suitable to be involved in the provision of care. We'll also refer information received in the notification of material change process to other areas of the Commission where it's evident that an approved provider or governing person has not complied with the Code of Conduct. Now, in relation to key personnel suitability, we're making changes to the approved provider application form that will allow the Commission to collect necessary information to identify whether those applying for approval to provide aged care have the necessary understanding of key personnel suitability and the systems and processes to ensure ongoing suitability of their key personnel. We will also amend the guide we've published for organisations seeking to apply for approval to provide aged care. As we do now, we'll be looking to assure ourselves that the suitability of key personnel is at the forefront of your mind, and as an organisation applying for approval, establishing your governing body, recruiting your key personnel, and as an ongoing business. This will include the Commission obtaining information about or copies of key personnel registrations, such as APRA, key personnel insolvency checks undertaken by an approved provider, NDIS banning audit checks, and police certificates evidencing that an individual has not been convicted of an indictable offence. The amended forms and guidance will be available on the Commission's website for use from 1 December 2022. Contact information will also be available should you have any questions about the guidance or the forms. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. And just as a reminder for all watchers, please submit your questions. We've already received a number. Keep them coming, and we'll do our best to handle as many of them as possible after we finish the presentations. Lisa Peterson is our next panellist, and Lisa is an assistant commissioner in the Commission, and she's going to be talking to us about a specific program that the Commission is running, which is aimed at strengthening governance and leadership. Now, I talked earlier about one of the value propositions of all of this work and why these additional expectations are being placed on providers. And Lisa's information that she'll share with you goes squarely to a recognition that providers appreciate the additional support that we're able to offer in order that they can be most efficient, most competent in leading the organisation and ensuring it is well governed. So I'll hand over to Lisa to take us through that topic. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks very much, Janet, and hi everybody. Thanks so much for coming along to the session this afternoon. So I'm here today to talk to you about the Governing for Reform in Aged Care program, a program that's being led by the Commission. I'm hoping that some of you might have heard about it, and perhaps your leadership team might already be enrolled. Enrolments for the program opened in March of this year. It's free, and today we have almost 3,000 people enrolled across more than 760 providers. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the program and why we think it's important. I'll talk about the different learning activities and let you know what people are saying about them. And of course, you can ask questions, so please put them into the chat. By way of background, this program was introduced in response to those recommendations from the Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety that Janet's spoken of. As Janet mentioned, the Royal Commission identified that there was really a need for stronger governance capability across the sector. And the reason that that's important is that there's a really strong link between good governance and safe quality care. So this program targets governing bodies, and that really means boards, people on boards, and executives across the sector, both for residential and home care services. And the purpose of the program is to help to lift organisational and clinical governance capability, but specifically in the context of the aged care reforms. So this program very much complements the stronger legislative obligations that you're hearing about in the session today. So let me tell you a little bit more about the program and how it was designed. So we had an open tender process, and then we partnered with KPMG to design, develop and deliver the program. And as I'm sure you can imagine, developing a program that's suitable for governing bodies and leaders of the diverse range of organisations that we have across the aged care sector was really a challenge. We also know that there are a lot of existing programs on organisational governance, but what we understood was needed was one that helped providers to understand and really get on board for the government's ambitious reform journey. So we started off with lots of research into what makes good governance. Then we engaged with the sector through a survey and a series of roundtables, and we spoke to senior leaders across the country to understand what was important for us to cover in the program and how it should be delivered. And a really important learning from that process was that the program really needed to be dynamic and offer different learning experiences for the many different participants that we're targeting. There's so much diversity across our sector leaders in terms of their roles, the time they've spent in the sector, the other industries they've worked in, their qualifications and experience. And we also recognise the impact of diversity in terms of the size and the type and location of all of our different aged care services. So in our survey, we also asked people to tell us where they thought they were most effective in governing and where they wished to change or develop further. And those results helped to inform our topics for the modules and other resources. So a really important part of the program design has been the development of a capability framework. So this consists of 4 capability domains, and these define the key skills and the behaviours and the mindsets that are required for good governance and effective leadership within the aged care environment. And these include placing older Australians at the centre of care, obligations and accountabilities, knowledge, skills and experience, and leadership and culture. And all of our program activities relate to one of these 4 domains. So what can you expect if you enrol in the program? Well, firstly, we encourage you to complete a diagnostic tool, and that provides each of our participants with a self-assessment of their strengths and opportunities against the 4 domains and helps to tailor an individual approach to their learning. As I said earlier, this program is run by KPMG, and I want to be really clear that anything you share with them through your participation in the program remains confidential. Absolutely nothing is shared with us at a provider or at a participant level. In fact, the only information that the Commission can access is really high-level content that's been de-identified. So you can feel very secure in being able to share your circumstances as part of your engagement with the program. Once you're enrolled, there's a monthly newsletter and other information about the latest program activities to help you to plan your learning. So we have a number of different online learning modules, and we ask that all learners complete the 4 core online modules. And there are also 12 discretionary modules which address different key topics of interest. The 4 core modules are really important because they cover the basics. And certainly while some learners have said that they're familiar with the content, others have also really appreciated the opportunity for a refresher. And in fact, a number of board members who are new to aged care have told us that the modules have been really useful for them to get up to speed on understanding our complex sector. Alongside the modules, we have what we call toolkits, and they include a whole range of different resources, including topic guides and flip guides. And so these are tools that will help you do a deeper dive into the module topic, and also things that you can adapt to use in your own organisation should you wish to. All but one, I think, of our 16 modules are now online, and our final module, which will be called the Reform Journey Ahead, focuses on all of the current aged care reforms that you're currently hearing about. That'll be launched later this month. Another really important feature of the program is our workshop program, and that's been really popular, and that covers a range of different topics of interest. So we typically will hold a workshop virtually for up to around 30 participants. And recent topics that we've talked about in workshops include attracting, developing and retaining a strong workforce, the future of dementia care, and inclusivity and diversity. Action learning groups have also been really popular, and this is where we bring groups of participants together to learn as a collective network. And so that gives people the opportunities to build relationships that they can continue outside the program. And from what we hear for both our workshops and our action learning groups, a really common theme in the feedback is that participants really value that opportunity to meet and hear from others in the sector about the challenges that they're facing and how they're responding. We also have a podcast series as part of the program. So this was just released in September, and so far we've got 5 speakers across the sector talking on a range of topics of interest, such as overcoming challenges and strategy and innovation, just to name a couple of them. One of our podcast speakers, Rachel Argaman, CEO, I really loved her description of good governance. She describes it as the ability to see whispers before they become shouts, through making simple observations and following up with good communication to ensure the loop is closed. And we've also been hosting monthly webinars with panels of guest speakers from within the aged care sector and also other industries. And those webinars are recorded for access by participants if you're not able to make the live event. And our next one is scheduled for the 17th of September, and will focus on leading transformation. Just a couple of other things I want to mention that target specific groups of providers. We've had great feedback from people that participate in our individual coaching sessions. So these are offered to organisations that might have less mature governance systems or experiencing challenges, might maybe perhaps through remoteness or limited resources. And eligible providers are able to receive 3 individual coaching opportunities with a governance expert. We're also offering leadership sprints to the large providers, and they allow for the implementation of really practical solutions for provider-specific issues to work on whole organisation outcomes. And we've also just released some new board resources to encourage governing body leaders to engage with some of the program content as a group and to share their learning. So as you can see, loads of choice and plenty of different learning activities to meet the needs of our sector leaders. One more thing before I finish. We've been asked by the sector whether the program provides any recognition or certification. And the answer is that while there's no formal assessment, we've recently introduced badging to give recognition of learners' participation and engagement level in the learning activities. So badges include bronze, silver, gold and platinum. And you can participants are using that towards continuing professional development, and some people are already posting on their LinkedIn or adding to their email signature to formally recognise their learning achievements through the program. So we're continuing to update the program content and to respond to feedback from our many learners. And you can go on our website to find out more about the program and its activities. To enrol in the program, please scan the QR code, or you can visit our website, www.agedcarequality.gov.au, or please email us at governingforreform@agedcarequality.gov.au. Thanks very much, Janet.
All right, well done. Lisa, I'm going to stay with you because we've received a fair few questions about the Governing for Reform program. So let me just fire a few at you.
Sure.
Can people other than CEOs and board members enrol in the program?
Thanks, Janet. That's a great question. The short answer is not at the moment. So currently the program is open to all governing board members and executive leaders of approved providers. Look, we know that there are a range of different training programs out there for aged care staff already in the marketplace, but we're thinking about what more we might do as we think about our next steps in relation to this program.
Okay. Another one. Questions come in, is there value in an entire board enrolling in the program together? And I know we've had questions about that offline too.
Oh, 100%. And in fact, we would absolutely recommend it. Governing boards, of course, are integral to the reform of the sector. And this program encourages and gives boards the opportunity to review how they operate and how their organisations operate. So boards can come together to undertake that diagnostic tool that I mentioned and to look at the various learning materials and tool that the program offers. And in fact, we've recently developed what we call For the Board Pack. And this is designed to help governing bodies to work collectively to uplift their governance capability and to initiate key governance conversations at their regular board meetings. So that pack is really designed to guide governing body members and executives in how they might establish a governing body development plan, how they can participate in learning activities through the program, and prompt discussions in their regular meetings using a series of prepared discussion papers. So that will include topics like workforce retention, continuous improvement, and data-driven decision making. So boards participating, absolutely. We warmly encourage it.
Okay. Somebody's asked for a reminder on the name of this program. What's it called again? And where do they find information on it?
So it's called Governing for Reform in Aged Care. And you can find information by going to www.gfr.agedcarequality, all one word, .gov.au. You'll find a link to it on the Commission's website.
All right, last in this sequence, and we obviously have some webinar participants who are program participants as well, because they're asking, will there be new content developed as we go forward from here?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So new content will continue to be developed. In fact, as I mentioned, we'll be excited to release shortly our new module on the reform journey. We're also building on a new series of podcasts, looking for those to be released, I think, early in the new year. We'll continue to run new workshops, webinars, and enrolled participants will continue to get their monthly newsletter, which will keep you up to date with all the new content that's on offer, but also includes some really, I think, fascinating interviews with CEOs and governing body members. Thanks, Janet.
Well done. Emma, I'm going to come to you now. We've got some questions on different aspects of the requirements. Let's go firstly to the board requirements, and particularly the Quality Care Advisory Body and the Consumer Advisory Body. Now, can you just refresh us on the role of the Quality Care Advisory Body, please?
Thanks, Janet. So the role of the Quality Care Advisory Body is outlined in the accountability principles. So part of the obligations are to at least once every 6 months give the governing body a written report about the quality of the aged care provided through each of the provider's services. So the body may request information from the provider to support them in preparing this report and providing advice, and the providers must comply with that request. This information could include things like feedback and complaints from consumers or their representatives and staff. So the Quality Care Advisory Body also at any time must be able to give feedback to the governing body about the quality of care being provided at the aged care services as well.
Okay, supplementary question from somebody. I already have an existing group in place that reports to our board on quality issues. Do I need to replace it?
So look, we're thrilled that people have boards or bodies in place that ensure the delivery of quality care at their services. So there's no expectation that these need to be replaced, but rather you do need to have a look at how it's operating and make sure that it complies with the legislation and the accountability principles.
Okay, let's move on to the other body, which it operates under a slightly different set of expectations, the Consumer Advisory Body. Now, how is that different, and what are the obligations that providers have in relation to this body?
So it is, well, it's mandatory to establish the Quality Care Advisory Body. The responsibility in relation to the Consumer Care Advisory Body is to offer at least once every 12 months to establish such a body. So this is because while the Consumer Advisory Body is an important element of every services governance arrangements, the consumer participation in them is still voluntary. So they may not wish to form an advisory body at a particular time. However, providers are still expected to demonstrate their promotion of the consumer advisory bodies and their attempts to re-establish the body. And this is important as the purpose of these bodies is to give the governing body or board feedback about the quality of care provided at the service.
Okay. There's a related question which goes to the composition of the board and the requirement for at least one member to have experience of clinical care. Mm-hmm. Are you able to, there's some people who are looking for greater clarity on what we mean by experience in clinical care. I think it's the common understanding of those terms, but is there anything further that you could say about that?
Look, we're aware of the need for more definition there. The Aged Care Act or the law hasn't specified clinical experience for the purposes of this requirement. So the Commission will be engaging with the sector further on this, because we want to look at that with providers to get that right. So broadly though, while experience in the provision of clinical care might not require the person to be currently practicing or delivering clinical care themselves, we encourage providers to consider the currency and relevance of their experience, for example, the context in which, or the role in which they have provided care in the past. And, ultimately this person must be able to provide clinical expertise and insights that guide the decisions or the key decisions that impact care to consumers of these services. So we're very keen to do some more co-design in this space with the sector, and I think through that pathway we'll land the best outcome here.
Okay. All right, Anne, let me come to you with some questions. To kick off, some providers are anxious about how well placed they're going to be to comply with the requirements as they commence at the beginning of December this year, the beginning of December next year, depending on whether they're an existing provider or a new provider. And that goes also to our lens, how we seek to assess compliance and the sort of conversations we would have with providers where we find them non-compliant. What sort of general assurances can you give to the sector, and particularly the people watching, about the way in which we're going to undertake our role as regulator, and how we will seek to be reasonable and well informed and risk proportionate in the approach we take?
So what we are seeking to do is to have you engage with these reforms and provide information as we set out. And where there is a lack of information, we'll be circling back to you to understand that you are clear about your obligations and to confirm the information you provide and to check whether it's current and appropriate. So our starting position is we want you to focus on your obligations and getting the information to us in the appropriate timeframes, but also that you've got the appropriate systems to gather and maintain accurate records of your information, because you need to satisfy yourselves that you have appropriate, suitable personnel, etc. So our engagement is definitely starts from that position. There may be circumstances where we do need to come back and seek further information from you, and we may find that you haven't complied with relevant timeframes or your obligations, and then we will need to take proportionate risk-based regulatory actions. But essentially, our starting point is communicate with us, seek information from us if you're not clear, and start with demonstrating to us that you understand your obligations and you're able to engage with those.
Okay, that's useful, and hopefully people find that generally reassuring. There's one question, and I don't know whether this is anyone's experience, but what should a provider do if they're not notified of changes to key personnel suitability? And the example that's provided is, for example, if someone is convicted of fraud but chooses not to disclose that and the provider is unaware of it, then they're not well placed to make a judgment on suitability or to amend their judgment on suitability. What's your response to that?
Okay, so providers are required to assess suitability every 12 months. And if during these reviews changes to suitability are identified, then you're required to take action. That the person did not advise that their change of circumstance should be taken into consideration along with the actual change. But it's that self-assessment exercise that providers should engage in and assessing suitability every 12 months that will help you keep up to date in relation to your staff and their suitability.
Okay. We are in the final stages of developing guidance, detailed guidance, but there's a question here about whether it will be, how specific it will be and how directive it will be. And I suppose what I would like to do is to give the opportunity of explaining that that we would not seek to issue guidance which is directive. It is, as the name suggests, guidance which must be interpreted by a provider in a particular set of presenting circumstances. We would always enable and expect a provider to come to the guidance and exercise judgment about the way in which they would undertake their role and fulfil their obligations. Is there anything further you want to say about that?
So we know that each provider is different, and although there are key documents we need to see, such as the notification forms and evidence of key personnel suitabilities, providers are required to keep documentation that demonstrates their particular circumstances. And as Janet said, the guidance document will not be prescriptive, but it will give you a steer as to what information you should be maintaining, and therefore the basis for reporting to us.
Okay. Emma, another question for you in relation to the Consumer Advisory Body, and it's one that we've fielded before, but I know people are looking for clarity. What if the provider has multiple services? It operates a number of residential services in a particular locality. What's the obligation in relation to consumer advisory bodies in that regard? Do they have to establish one for every service, or does it work differently?
Hi, Janet. I'm testing my memory a bit here, but I think we had agreed that they could have shared arrangements, but that the feedback needs to go to the boards about the operations of the service, because that's the purpose of one of the key purposes of the consumer advisory body's existence, is at the service level to provide feedback on the operations of that service through a consumer lens and experience.
Yes, and it is certainly the case that it is a matter for consumers in the first instance to identify that they are very keen to have a consumer advisory body. And if there are multiple residential services where bodies of consumers in each of those services puts their hand up and says, yes, we would really like to have our own body, then we're looking for the board to respond favourably to that.
That would be the expectation, yes.
Yeah. And what I think what we're hoping for is, if that happens, I actually think that's a great thing, because it means that the board and the chief executive of that organisation gets a very clear signal, a strong voice coming from consumers of multiple services about the way they are experiencing care, and their interest in expressing preferences or expectations about the way in which that care is going to be delivered. And I think it is then up to the board and the CEO to engage with those consumers via the consumer advisory body, to have that conversation, to hear that clarity of voice, and to respond to it in the way that the standards expect providers to respond to individual consumer needs. It is actually the platform for a level of engagement with consumers that some boards have not had historically. So what the new legislation requirement does is to introduce this as another means by which a board can connect directly with a group of consumers and hear from them in an undiluted way what's working for them and what they would like to discuss in terms of negotiating possibly a different way of operating. So it's a really valued way of getting close to the consumer voice. And as Emma explained, the board is obliged to ask residential services at least annually whether the consumers in that service are interested in establishing this sort of body. So we're looking for evidence from providers that they have put the question carefully and sensibly and invitingly to a group of consumers to say, well, you don't have a consumer advisory body at the moment, but if you're interested in us assisting you to establish one, then we're all in. We're happy to help you to have that direct voice to the board, and that's pretty much where it goes. Now, we've got some other questions. Emma, staying with you, I think it's with you. I think there's a question about the governance obligations and whether they apply to providers of Commonwealth Home Support Program services. Can you take that one?
Yes. And look, there was a very nice slide at the beginning of the slide pack, which shows clearly that the grant-funded programs through the Commonwealth Home Support Program and the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Flexible Aged Care Program are not encompassed in these provider governance obligations yet.
And is that because they are not approved providers under the Act?
Correct. They're not covered by the accountability principles or the legislation. They're regulated or administered through their funding agreements.
And you say yet, is that opening the possibility, and we don't know, I suppose it's speculation, but it's possible that under a new Aged Care Act with
Correct.
new arrangements for support at home, we might see some embracing of CHSP services in this larger range of obligations. Would that be possible?
I think that's right, Janet. We don't know where that's dependent on the consultation development process about the Support at Home program, but I think we'd certainly encourage all aged care providers to look to the intentions of these changes around what we're looking for from the connectivity between quality advisory bodies, consumer advisory bodies and their boards, working together to move information through the organisation that informs better decision making. So, and there's a lot of services that can adopt these principles if they haven't already.
Yeah, it doesn't require legislative requirement for services to be leaning in and actively looking at these obligations to see whether there's value add for you to move concertedly in this direction on a proactive basis. Anne, a couple of questions for you on key personnel. There's one question about the definition of key personnel, and I'm thinking you're probably going to direct us all to guidance that's available on our website.
Yes, look, I think that's best. I think it's important that people engage with the information on our website to understand what key personnel is. Yes.
And there's another one which is very specific, but I'll ask it. In terms of notifying when someone becomes key personnel, the 14-day time frame, they're looking for clarity. Is that referring to days after the individual commences in the role?
Yes, absolutely. And conversely, if an individual ceases being in a role, they need to report with 14 days from the date the person ceases to be in that role. Or when they cease to be employed, or if they've moved into a role that is not a key personnel role.
Okay. Emma, a matter of detail for you in terms of a timing question. For existing approved providers, what's the date for the commencement of the requirement to have a majority of independent non-executive members and one member experienced in clinical care for existing providers?
Yes, for existing group providers, all those governing body requirements are to be in place by 1 December 2023.
Okay, so they have a year, which is, I suppose, in recognition that they already have a composition. They would need to make amendments in the existing membership and possibly turn over some of their existing members in order to comply with the new requirement. Is that why?
Yes, and we'll be definitely looking. We'll be releasing more information and I think progressing with the sector as it engages in these requirements over the next year. But I think the important piece for 1 December 22, so coming up this year, is to be very across providers to be across their obligations around key personnel and material changes, which are expanding, and what's required of them there.
And those requirements specifically that you mentioned just then, they are from December this year?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so that's an important distinction. There is no one who gets another year to comply with the key personnel changes and so on. They have to make sure that they're good to go in short order. Okay. Lisa, question without notice to you, and it might be that you refer us to the website, but people have been asking about Alice. Are you able to offer a couple of sentences on our online learning platform and the best way to find it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Janet. And great that people in the crowd have an interest. So Alice, of course, is our online learning program. The really important thing to know about Alice is, again, it's now free to participate in Alice programs. And Alice offers a range of different training modules covering all sorts of topics. The quality standards, SIRS, COVID, we've got new content coming out all the time, particularly directed to the various reform measures. So the best way to find your way to Alice is to go to our website, and you'll find a link there on our homepage.
Wonderful. Last quick question I think that we have time for to Emma. Does the Consumer Advisory Body requirement also apply to home care providers?
All the provider governing reforms apply to home care package providers, short-term restorative care at home, in a home setting, multi-purpose services where they might be doing home-based, as well as residential aged care and transition care programs. So, as we said earlier, not CHSP and the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Flexible Aged Care Program at this stage, but all the other types of home-based care.
Okay, good to have that clarified. Thank you. That's unfortunately all the time we have questions for. There are other questions that I wasn't able to get to, and we will publish the questions and answers to them on our website. Thank you very much for your participation and for all the questions that you sent in. I just want to repeat the poll that we took at the very beginning of the webinar. Same question: how well do you understand strengthening provider governance reforms now after today's webinar? And again, you have the opportunity of checking one of 4 responses: very well, well, to some extent, and very little. So they're piling on in. Well done. You've figured out the buttons and so on. And very reassuringly, we seem to have lifted the curve. If you recall, we had the vast majority responded, 60% in our initial poll responded to some extent. That has now retreated down to around 30%. We have well over half of respondents who are now reporting that they understand the governance reform obligations well, and another 16% who are reporting that they understand them very well. So all up, that's about 70% or more who are now reporting in those top 2 categories, well or very well. Thank you. Really gratifying. And thank you for paying such close attention and for giving us some very quick feedback on how well we've done. But there is also the survey at the end that I commend to you. Now, there's more information that is available on our website. We've mentioned that a few times on the way through. Please check it out. Keep an eye on it because it will be refreshed as there is greater clarity and specificity about some of these obligations. We will be taking your questions on notice and using them also to inform the additional information that we make available to you. So no time has been wasted on this. Thank you very much to Emma, to Anne and to Lisa for doing such a great job as panel members and communicating information to you as clearly as they have. There will be a recording of this webinar available on our website in coming days. And please keep an eye out for the registration for our final webinar in this particular series, which is on the Code of Conduct for aged care, which is on this Friday at 2 to 3 p.m. daylight time, Eastern Daylight Time. It's targeted at aged care workers, and some of you may be aged care workers. And what we're going to do is provide an overview of the code and what it means for you as an aged care worker and the work that you do. So please, if you're a provider, promote the webinar to your staff, encourage them to come along or possibly to watch it online afterwards. We do think it's going to be relevant to assist them in understanding the obligations under the code and to reassure them that there's nothing out of the box, that it's all very familiar and hopefully well within their reach. Thank you everyone for your participation today. Really appreciate the questions and your active engagement in this webinar through the poll and the survey. Stay online to give us some feedback, please. Good afternoon, everyone.